Um, you're gonna read one of these stories, I think, with Ms. Roberts, if she has time. I think it's the Blue Hotel. I'm not a big fan of so-called realistic stories because a lot of things do not, nothing happens much. You know, it's just a lot of character study, but very little action. Red Badge of Courage is an exception, and I think that's why it's the most popular one he wrote. All right, so you need to know what naturalism is. It has really nothing to do with what you might think, with nature, with the Audubon Society. This is actually very depressing and dull, I think, kind of philosophy. Basically, it starts with the belief that man was an animal and that he responded, that is, man did, to outward forces, environmental forces, and inward forces. And he has no control or real knowledge of these things. And so some concepts that helped develop this idea were Darwinism, Marxism, and psychology. They didn't, I guess, contribute directly to it. They contributed to the overall idea. You know, Darwinism, if those people who believe in evolution, I mean, people didn't have any control over that. It just happened. It is true, though, that we have no control over our DNA, the gifts and talents we get, you inherit from our parents, our height, all those things are fixed. Marxism is the same way. I find this less, I don't know, I'm not sure how they explain this, but I've studied it. I studied it in college. It was interesting, but I never quite understood it. Marx believed that history was like evolution. You know, it was just moving inexorably. One thing led to another, one thing determined another, and that history, society, and the economics were all produced by previous forces. And then you go inside the human mind to psychology, and that's where Freud comes in. And so he believed that both economically, socially, biologically, and psychologically, most of what we are is just predetermined. Not in a scriptural way, you know, like predestination or something by God, just by all these physical forces. We have little control over even the decisions we make. That's what determinism is, the theory that acts of the will. Occurrences in nature, social, psychological occurrences are causally determined by preceding events or natural laws. So that this seems like life is, everything happens because it was predetermined it would happen, but not by a divine creator, but by scientific, not science. Science doesn't do it; it just studies it, but by nature and forces in nature. So that's behind this. We're going to watch. I hope we have time to watch a short movie called Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And to me, it's almost an allegory. I don't think it was intended to be, but it's an allegory of determinism. It just shows you what does that really look like. In other words, everything happens, and you have very little control over anything. It's also a Civil War story written by a Civil War era writer. Crane is a naturalist, and he believes that even fiction should be influenced by science, and so that the things that happen in fiction are things that can be studied and understood by looking at the sciences. So his stories are violent, the characters are defeated, they're often trapped, they're not traditional heroes, and basically his writing depicted the harsh misery of life. So not a lot of fun. This book is. I think this book is
exactly
different.
uplifting.
No, and I think that's in keeping with his beliefs. He's not acknowledging a creator God, and so if someone who's deterministic wouldn't be real excited about life. Except for this book. This book actually has a, I wouldn't say happy ending. It's certainly, I think, a little more inspiring. Well, this is another movement. It's primarily an art movement that you can see influencing this story and Stephen Crane. Impressionism. And it's actually, in a broad way, that part is easy to understand. Impressionism is writing about something without worrying about the actual details of it, more the impression that thing gives you. So anyway, at a precise moment, how you feel about something dictates these writers. What it looks like to you at that moment is what motivates these writers to describe something. At a precise moment, the mood they were in at that moment affects the way you understand something is happening. And it's from a 19th century philosophy, mainly French Impressionism. And the object was, again, to capture the impressions that the object makes rather than the actually depicting what the object is, like a tree. Instead of painting a tree, the impressionist might paint the effect of the tree, which that's not what I want to see in artwork. I don't understand artwork enough to appreciate that. If I did, maybe that would be something I could appreciate. But you get some of that in the writing of people like Stephen Crane, that he's describing so you're not really clear what he's looking at or what's happening. It's kind of blurry, but he's giving you the impression he has of that thing. And war is a good subject to do that because they call it the fog of war. And literally in the Civil War, there was not fog, but there was smoke all over the battlefield, and it would be hard to see clearly. And so that's perfect for the impressionist, who's now he's going to describe what it's like to look at war through this fog or this smoke. Not only the literal smoke, but the way it makes you scared to death and you can't think clearly. All right, so here's some ways that philosophy appears in the book. Like, how do you know that it's Impressionism? And the first one points out that the sentences are not connected. Like, one sentence is not necessarily the next, and the next sentence is not necessarily what happens right after that sentence. You know, there's a gap or break, they're disjointed. The sense impressions are not connected or linked. Somebody pointed out, I don't have it up anymore, but I used to have a copy that I put up of Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, and somebody explained, if you look at it carefully, you'll see that they didn't take the brush and brush the stroke. Yeah, it's more like dots or little lines, and you can look at that picture, I'll keep pointing there, it's not there. But the whole, you stand back, it looks like a coherent whole. You get closer and you see these individual lines or brush marks that aren't connected. And so that's what these writers were imitating. And the use of vignettes. A vignette is a scene that you don't know what happened before it happened or afterwards. The cavalry crossing a ford is an example of a vignette. You get this picture of this cavalry unit crossing the water, and you don't see what came up. You don't know or see what happened before, because soldiers are literally coming out of the woods or out of the shore, out of the side of the pane, so to speak, and they cross and then they leave. So you don't see where they come from or where they're going, and that's what he likes to do. You just see a picture. You don't know who they are or what happens to them. and you'll never know. Some of the characters you do, but even this story, the way it ends, you don't know really whatever happens to these. The use of contrast. One odd thing about this book and the descriptions, there are lots of colors, but there's also a lot of black and gray, so it's like there's a lot of contrast. You say bright colors against black or gray colors. And finally, it's a mass of fragments and episodic scenes. So that's how Impressionism is delivered. And here are some of the themes of the book. The structure, and this is just one interpretation of it, but I like it and it's useful, so at least we have something we can use to analyze it. The book is kind of organized into three parts: separation, initiation, and return. So even at the very beginning, the theme of the book is separation. Henry Fleming is leaving his home. He's joining a group of people that he doesn't know, and he doesn't feel like a unified, coherent unit with them. The initiation is the event, the thing that he goes through. In this case, his first combat, it may be the Battle of Chancellorsville. He actually has two opportunities to fight on two separate days. And so those become the initiation. He's initiated into something. And then finally, he gets it all together. The separation is now over, and he's now a part of something. So when we read it, I'd ask you to look at how he grows up, but also how the unit he's a part of grows up. The unit becomes more literally unified and together as they spend time in combat. At the beginning of the story, you don't get any names, which actually makes sense. When you first join something, you don't know people's names. He's the tall guy, he's the short guy, he's the loud one. In this case, when you meet these soldiers, each one of these is significant in the story, but they don't have names at first. The tall soldier and the loud soldier are the only two people whose names beside the main character that you get. The tattered soldier and the cheery soldier play significant roles, but never are given names because they're not in his unit, neither one of them, and he never presumably sees them again after the story is over. When you get to when you go to join the military, I've often thought of this. You see them marching, and they all look exactly alike. They all have the same, obviously it's a uniform. The haircut's the same. You can't see any individuality. And that's hard for people to get used to. When you join the military, you have to give that up immediately. You get off the bus, they cut your hair, they give you a uniform, they yell at you, everybody is the same. And they're trying to make you a part of a group rather than be an individual. And that's hard to do. There's a scene almost exactly through the middle of the book, that it's clear a reference or an allusion to the crucifixion of Christ, and which was an atonement. Something had to be atoned for. Somebody had to pay